I just felt like men had all the power. It would be better to be a man because no one's going to hurt you. No one's going to mistreat you or abuse you. Thought this consciously at a young age, but I didn't verbalize it until later because I said, I will never let that happen to me.
It doesn't take severe trauma, for us to start to wonder, to start to get askewed a little bit.
Feeling wanting to be a boy and attracted to girls, I didn't feel like there was anybody I could speak to. As close as I was to my mother, I couldn't even talk to her.
Girls that tend to be wired that way, their personality is more like that. They're almost automatically now labeled as either trans or lesbian, and can't just be a girl that likes a little bit of things that some of the guys like.
All it took was one statement from a coworker, and they asked, because they all knew me, they knew my lifestyle, I was more masculine, and they just asked, well, are you going to transition now?
There are massive dollars for doctors and for the medical industry and the pharmaceutical companies, for all of this. You're permanently medicalizing someone for the rest of their life.
July, of 2018, I had said out loud to myself that I was trans. I changed my name, my gender, on my driver's license, my birth certificate, my social security card by the end of the year. He had a plan, and that his plan was right and good, and that he'd created me as a woman because that's what he saw fit to do. That was his purpose.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Whether you are coming through Love and Truth Network or through a connection to Transforming Congregations, we're really glad that you're here. We would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast. We'd encourage you to pass around information that we exist and the kind of conversations. If you're ministered to, if you're blessed, if you're encouraged, if you're challenged, we would love for you to pass along to your pastors, with other Christians in your life, others that may be interested in the kind of conversations that we typically have on our podcast. Let people know about it. We appreciate that. Today, we have somebody with us that I am excited for you to get to know better. I do not have a long history with Lisa, but I met her a couple of years ago at a church in Georgia where I was doing some ministry. I started ministering in that church probably back in 2022. And it wasn't long after that Lisa came to that church and began to attend. And you're going to hear her story, but I've been back to that church a couple of times. We've maintained relationship and it's just growing. Melissa and I will actually be back there again at this church in Georgia in the fall. And we're just excited at what God is doing throughout that church. But I'm so excited for you to hear Lisa's story. And really, my story, Lisa's story, it's really God's story in our lives and the way that he has stepped in and loved us to wholeness and drawn us in to transformation in Christ. So without further ado, Lisa, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Gary, for having me. It's an honor to be on your podcast.
Thanks so much. And I know you've been following us and listening to some of our other podcasts, and that's a joy to my heart for sure. But I am excited for you to share some of your story with those that are watching or listening to us right now. Well,
I was raised in the Kentucky area, born in Indiana. My mother, I was raised in the church, mainly by my mother. She took us to church, and but I was born into a household of violence and abuse. My father was an alcoholic, and so I saw that from like a really, really early age, and there was no sense of self-worth or pouring into me from my father. I think that affected me. My mom did the best she could, but I just too though is putting that out there. It doesn't have to be any severe trauma, that causes these things to happen. And an enemy's going to try to use whatever he can to get you wherever he can get you.
That is right.
But so I guess I just felt like men had all the power, and it would be better. It would be better to be a man because no one's going to hurt you, no one's going to mistreat you or abuse you, which is such a lie
Mm-hmm.
of the enemy. But so an incident that really impacted me, which is so small it seems like, but I was outside in my little pants and shirt and just sitting on the lawn, probably about 4 years old,
Mm.
and a little boy on his bicycle come riding by, and he just stopped, and we had quite a lengthy conversation. I have no idea what it was about. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
when he left and went on his way, it was time for me to get ready for church because Mom did raise me in church, but it was legalistic. Women couldn't cut their hair; they had to wear dresses, that sort of thing. So I put on a dress and came back out and sat down, and the little boy came back by, going back to where he had come from, and was like, "I thought you was a boy," and he was just so angry because he realized he was talking to a girl.
Wow. I mean, that to me, that's incredible. That I love what you said earlier, Lisa, that it doesn't take severe trauma, for us to start to wonder, to start to get askewed a little bit. The enemy doesn't need trauma he's always looking for an access point, kind of like infection to a wound. He's always looking for an access point to be able to get into our lives and make a mess of this. So at the time that you were 4 and this event happened, you were living in Indiana or in Kentucky?
I was in Kentucky.
Okay. And let me just ask some things about just family of origin. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a brother.
Okay. Older, younger? Okay, younger brother. And so when you were 4 years old and this happened, what was do you recall? I know you don't recall the conversation of what you guys were talking about, but for him, he's thinking he's talking to a boy. He's hugely disappointed. What did that stir in you as far as feelings? Did anything kind of hit you right then?
Yeah, I wanted to be a boy. Yes, like,
Okay.
wow, yeah, this is like really a big deal that to him that I'm not a boy, and it's like, feeling like, wow, I'm less than, you can't have a conversation with me because I'm not a boy. So yeah.
Yep. Had you ever experienced up to that point any feelings of like not wanting to be a girl or wanting to be a boy?
I don't really remember any up until that point. I believe they may have been starting to develop in that direction, but that just kind of really kind of set it off.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I find to be tragic today is tomboys, girls that are a little bit more rough and tumble, like to climb trees, like to kind of hang out and do what the boys do or a dad does. Like they're practically non-existent today because for my estimation, girls that tend to that be wired that way, their personality is more like that. They're almost automatically now labeled as either trans or lesbian, and can't just be a girl that likes a little bit of things that some of the guys like, and so. Do you recall feeling like even prior to this point, you talked about having to put on a dress to go to church and all that. Some kids that I've talked to or some adults looking back in their childhood remember like just despising, like they had a deep-seated gender dysphoria that happened practically as far back as they can ever remember. And some of that was borne out by the fact that they didn't like to put on a dress, or they didn't like to, like they not just didn't like to, but they hated doing that because it kind of represented something that they didn't like. Do you recall having those kind of feelings, or was it kind of fairly okay up until this kind of a big deal for you at 4 years old?
Yeah, I think it was okay with it before that point, you know. And then of course there was the kids at school. Well, why do you always wear dresses? Why is that all you wear? I guess there were a few times that Mom would let me wear pants, maybe just because I was a little kid.
Yep.
But it's like, why do I have to, and no, everybody else gets to?
Yeah.
to wear the
So
pants,
even at school,
right?
you had to wear dresses.
Yes.
Okay, got it. And I mean, honestly, for those that are listening or watching this, it doesn't take a brain scientist to figure out that children don't like to be ostracized. They don't like to be set apart. They don't like to have unique things about them called out and questioned or mocked or, just kind of looked down on. And so even a girl who's very comfortable wearing dresses or whatever is going to start to feel like there's something wrong with her, and especially like you just said, you're looking around and all the other girls are just kind of dressed in whatever, maybe a dress on occasion or what have you, but they're just wearing kind of kids' clothes. You're coming in nearly all the time wearing dresses, and because people are pointing it out, they're asking. This situation that happened with this boy when you were 4. It's just amazing how something that, in a sense, is so innocuous to a 4-year-old can be very, very laden with a lot of emotion.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I wouldn't have really been conscious of it or put much thought into it if it wasn't for those things that happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And from then on, I mean, at an early age, when I was playing with other children in the neighborhood, like some of us would come together, boys and girls, and we're going to play like, okay, I remember one specific time, it's like there were several girls and several boys, and it's like, okay, these are the wives and we're the husbands. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not being a wife. I'm going to be a husband.
Okay, yep.
And so, yeah, that was in there early. And none of the other children really in the neighborhood, I don't recall saying anything about that, but they probably didn't catch that it meant anything, I don't think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Did you have a sense with your mom and dad? I mean, was there, your dad was it sounds like pretty standoffish toward you. Yeah.
That's how I felt, yeah.
Yeah, and did your dad, how was your dad relating to your mom? I mean, did you see their relationship as something that felt like a detriment to your mom, or did it seem like it was a good and pretty wholesome relationship?
Oh, yeah, no, it was very detrimental, yeah.
Okay.
To her physical and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
I think I thought this consciously at a young age, but I didn't verbalize it until later because I said, I will never let that happen to me.
Yes. Yeah, that language, Melissa and I often, and plenty of others, we've learned this from others, though, that I will never language of a child, fill in the blank. It could be, you could say it very differently, or I'm not going to, or whatever, but that I will never isn't just kind of a general statement that is pretty innocuous or just kind of in that moment. Oftentimes, I mean, it could be, but oftentimes in what you're describing, I think it's this deeper kind of a vow, like this deep internal sense that, no, I am throwing off. I experienced that too toward my dad in terms of defensive detachment and other things as well. But it was powerful. Like I had to come back later and renounce the vow of that and begin to agree and align with God about what's good and wholesome about who I am and that kind of thing. Does that, would you say also, like you said, yes, but what do you think about that concept of even at those formative ages or that age, actually kind of making a vow with that statement?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it. I've learned that recently that was a vow, a covenant I had made with myself outside of the covenant of God. So the enemy was able to come in and just use that and
yes,
in whatever way he wanted.
Yeah. And it's not, it's not fair, right? I mean, the idea that we as children in our innocence and naivete and ignorance, honestly, because we're just kids, we just don't know any better. And yet the enemy he loves to rob and steal innocence, I think, as early as possible. I think he has a particular fascination with that, actually, just from the numbers of people that I hear at very early ages who just got swept up into some pretty dark things as time went on. And the enemy just doesn't play fair at all. He's not going to avoid children. He's not going to avoid messing with their innocence. If anything, he's actually going to lean in and try to disrupt our innocence at the earliest ages possible.
Oh, yes. Yes, he is. And he's going to make it to where you feel isolated.
Yes.
And there's no one you can confide in, which is what happened with me because, wanting to be a boy and attracted to girls, I didn't feel like there was anybody I could speak to. As close as I was to my mother, I couldn't even talk to her about it. There was just, being in the church and the only thing, it wasn't a teaching church. There was just preaching at you and the hellfire and brimstone and you can't do this or you're going to hell. And
yes.
And also, I remember we were at a store one time. My brother and I stayed in the car, but my mom was coming out of the store and this person whom we thought was a man was hitting on our mom, talking to our mom, and we're out of the car, kind of hanging out the window and like, oh, Mom, this man's, talking to you. I don't remember what we said, but later I don't think she may have said that wasn't a man, but I remember later my mom making a statement, which she doesn't live by now, thank God, but she's like, all those people need to be lined up and shot, talking about the gay people. So that's in my mind too. And I'm like, there's no way I can tell this to my mom.
Yes.
Even older, when I'm going through these feelings at the beginning of puberty. So.
Yep. Yeah. And I've heard many people talk about, and this was part of my experience, and I'm sure you've picked up on some of this too as a kid. It's not just something as overt, which is shocking and terrible to make those kind of statements. My dad, I'm sure, made them as well. That would just kind of fit within his character. But also the way that we can joke, the way that people in the church kind of joke and are dismissive and snide and sarcastic toward those within the LGBT world, that's just one of those comments is enough to absolutely shut us down in terms of feeling completely unsafe of bringing any of this out to receive any kind of help or support, certainly as a young person growing up in the church.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It just pushes you deeper into yourself.
Yeah. How did your life kind of advance from being a young girl going through? When did you stay in Kentucky in that area through most of your childhood into your adulthood?
My parents actually divorced when I was 10, and we moved south. So I lived in Florida, and for a while, I went back to stay with my dad later on. I came out, I guess, when I was 15 as lesbian because of that. It was so bursting. I felt like I had to get it out. Mm-hmm. And
what year was that in, roughly?
Oh, my goodness. Let's see. I was 15 and I was born in 68. So this would have been.
Yeah. So in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Yep.
And still, there wasn't much that I was able to, I remember when this was going on first in me and nobody to talk to. So we live in this is when I was living with my dad in this small town, and I go to the library and I check out the only book I can find on homosexuality. And it's a lot of scientific or whatever mumbo jumbo, and only one little thing that maybe I could relate to. But I kept checking that book out over and over again, just because it was the only thing I felt like I could, I don't know, just hold on to or something.
Yeah, it kind of gave you a window into yourself a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Actually, the last time I checked it out, I remember, goodness, 20 years or later, something, I found that book in my closet, and I finally took it back to the library.
Oh, that's funny. All right.
Yeah.
Yep. So you held on to it for a good long while.
I did. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about, so you grew up in some kind of a faith environment, and yet, and it sounds like you might have even grown up in a more legalistic background than I did. I certainly refer to it as pretty legalistic, kind of very fundamental, lots and lots of truth thumping. And
Yes.
and I oftentimes say I'm very grateful today, and have been for a long time, for the truth that was poured in. But there was very little love or compassion or a desire to walk with people who were hurting in any way, shape, or form. People in the church, tiny little country church, people were very free with asking for prayer for, their grandmother's this or that, or aunt so-and-so's this, or so-and-so that got hurt on the farm or gored by a bull, or whatever kind of crazy thing was happening around us. It was always physical stuff. Someone's in the hospital. But there was never any vulnerability around soul issues, or certainly nothing around sexual struggles and sin issues. When did you find, or even in your relationship with God, when did you begin to discover that God was more than just a rules-based kind of slave master?
Oh my goodness, that took years. I think actually really just recently that I'm really discovering that.
All right. Okay. Well, I don't want to jump too far ahead. So how did your life kind of progress? You came out at 15 as lesbian, and did you get into a relationship pretty quickly, or were you kind of dating, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah. So I told my brother, so I've had to go back and apologize to him since then. That was so wrong of me to lay something like that on him, who he in turn told my father, who called my mother and was like, oh, what do we do? So my mom's like, I'm coming to get her. We're going to straighten this out.
Yeah.
So she was attending an Assembly of God at then, which was a less legalistic than what I grew up in.
Sure.
And so I actually ended up right around my 16th birthday giving my life to the Lord and actually getting baptized in the Holy Spirit. But there was still there was really no teaching into what that meant or how to cultivate an intimate relationship with Christ. And immediately after that, I was even at 16 going to go to a vacation Bible school thing they were having, and had been invited to stay at someone's home. But when that happened, this person, I guess there were spirits, of course, that left me when I got saved and baptized. And they, I guess from what I understand, tried to jump on her. So she got fearful and then decided that it wasn't a good idea that I stay at her home. And I think that kind of affected me some in my newfound relationship with Christ.
So are you saying then, Becky, that the person who had said you could stay with her was feeling something in terms of like dark spiritual stuff going on? Okay. And she attributed that to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fear just came over her. This was just, I guess, I don't know if it was, I don't think they had really known much about, all of this still. And there was just a lot of fear around it, even though I had gotten free of it. I'd gotten saved, but I admit I went astray pretty quickly.
Yeah, what a tragedy that, and I don't know the full story about this, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there was an opportunity, and I know you don't know what life would have looked like had you lived there, and I think that there may have been a hope that this woman might have given you a healthy environment, a Christ-like environment to kind of be in, and that there could have been some discipleship or something that happened. And yet, because of what she was kind of picking up on, and then that kind of turning away, there wasn't really opportunity for you to get planted in, at least not not in the way that you thought. And that kind of led to you very quickly kind of turning away from what you knew God was calling you to. Is that a fair summarization? If not, kind of flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's very fair summarization.
So what did it look like when you kind of pulled away, pushed away?
Yeah, so I started, pursuing what my desires were,
Yeah.
Except for the transition thing. That was I always pushed that in the back because from what I'm at a young age, I'm like, yeah, that can't never happen. I can't never be a male. I can't never be a boy.
So you're fascinated by the thought of it, but you didn't believe it could be a reality.
Yeah. So even when I was 20 and I was hearing more about it in my early 20s, I was like, oh yeah, I can't afford all this psychological evaluation. I can't afford surgeries. So let me just put that in the back because it's not something that can happen for me. And then during those years in my 20s and 30s, there were a couple of times that I did attempt to go back to the church and serve the Lord. And those were mostly out of guilt. This is the way my mom raised me. This is what I have to do. This is the right thing to do. So
were you feeling any emptiness also, Becky? I mean, what were there things in your life that felt like there were big gaps? Or, I mean, how would you generally describe your sense of well-being in those years?
Severe anxiety, even though I didn't get medically diagnosed. Now that I look back and I know what that is, I had severe anxiety and no peace, no peace at all. It was torment.
Yes.
But yeah.
So was there some sense, I know for me, there were some times that I would kind of stick my toe back in the door of the church when I was living as a bartender at a gay club or when I was in the LGBT world, because I did grow up that way. And I think I had a similar sense that I know what the right path is, but I'm doing this. But also it was driven by, I think, that sense of no real purpose and here, this is a distraction and there's been highs, but there's tons of lows, way more lows than there are highs, basically, emotionally. And I think some of those things also kind of propelled me to kind of stick my toe in the door of the church. And then I very quickly pulled it back out again and went about my business away from God.
Yeah. There was a sense of loss and wow, I don't have any future. I'm just lost. I'm just roaming around here. And that kind of drove me, back to the church because, I knew, even though I sometimes questioned, is this really the truth, because we're not taught why do we believe what we believe.
Yes.
Even though in my spirit, I knew it was the truth. So yeah, there was this God does have a future and plan for me. But at the same time, it was because I had thought this, I was like, God, why did you give me to these people, right? They're supposed to love me and nurture me. And so feeling like that, I projected that feeling onto God that he didn't love me. He didn't want me,
Yep. Yep. I did the same thing. I thought surely I have to be adopted. There's no way that, I wasn't, but I just couldn't imagine how I could fit in with, I have a sister and 3 brothers, and I'm very different than all of them. And I just thought that it doesn't make sense. They're all similar in many ways. And I feel like I'm sort of stick out like a sore thumb and don't really belong in the family. But obviously I did, but I felt the same way toward God. Like, what did you do? Why did you do this? I don't know if there's really been a time in my life. I know I've doubted some with regard to, is God real? Is evolution true, or those kind of things? But those were very passing kind of seasons. I've really understood that, yes, there is a God, and it takes a lot more quote unquote faith to believe in that this just kind of all came about randomly than to believe that there's intelligent design behind it, that there is a creator. But then it was the feeling of, oh yes, you exist, but you hate me. and so therefore, and you're displeased with me, etc. And so that really propelled a lot of my pushing away from the church. And one of the things too, Becky, that you said that I think is so important, or Becky, one of the things you said, Lisa, that's so important to understand is when you were talking about there was a lot of rules were sewn into you, but nothing to do with why. And I think that's such an important question that the church needs to be answering in the life of young people and adults is, yes, these are the commands of Scripture, but now why? What is the good, wholesome, fatherly, loving design behind these things that is meant to produce human thriving, not misery or God's a killjoy or whatever? We've got to talk about the why and the how, not just the what.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Yes. And I'm, delving into that more now, and I'm so excited about it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so you wound up, I don't know if you kind of have some ways of filling in the gap from in your 20s and 30s or whatever, but you came eventually to this church that I was doing ministry at, not while I was there, but after the fact, the first time in the state of Georgia. And how did you, was this one of those times again that it was like, you're kind of reapproaching Christianity kind of yet again, and because of the emptiness or what have you, or what propelled you to check out the church when you did just a few years ago?
This was totally a God thing. So I have to go back to before I came to Georgia. So I ended up working for a company for 15 years. Great job, but they started doing insurance for people who wanted to transition, like covering everything.
Yep.
Right. And so that had been so in the back of my head for all those years. All it took was one statement from a coworker, and they asked, because they all knew me, they knew my lifestyle, I was more masculine, and they just asked, well, are you going to transition now? And I had, even though they had gotten the insurance, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do that. But this person asked that question, and I thought, well, maybe this was my answer to him. Maybe I'll transition socially, but not medically. But that question set off this series of events where, I went into a really depressive state. I refused to talk to my mother for 3 months. I'm like, I'm not talking to you. I don't want to hear the God stuff anymore. I'll come out of this thing and I'll either have a God or I won't. And I came out of that depressive state and started speaking with her again. But then several months later, I just said it out loud. I'm trans.
Well, so let's pick up with that statement in just a minute. But I really, again, want to emphasize for those that are watching or listening, the power of a question. When you talk about someone, like, you knew it was there, you kind of knew it existed, but until someone asked you a question about, well, are you going to do this now? It reminds me when my wife was engaged to be married to a man, and it's good that she did not follow through with that engagement, that she broke that off. There was a lot of, even though really good guy and all that I don't know, but she did and went back later and apologized to him. But she broke off that engagement really as the result of one of her friends saying, even though her friend knew her fiance and that kind of thing, but saying, hey, have you ever thought about dating so-and-so? And so-and-so was a woman. And that question, Melissa often says, just kicked the door wide open, where she had only had same or opposite sex relationships. She'd only been in relationships with guys, and she was at George Washington University at the time. And she had never, ever been involved in anything same sex up to this point. But the power of that question at the right time, and you know who asks questions often in Scripture, and we see it right in the garden. Did God really say? The enemy is great about asking questions. And it reminds me also of a recent podcast we did with James Lindsay on his book called Queering of the American Child, The Queering of the American Child. And in his book, he talks about the questions that are often addressed to children. And I heard for a number of years where not all schools, not all public schools are doing this. Sometimes private ones are too. But just the question where a teacher will sort of, shrug her shoulders and kind of innocently say, well, I'm just asking my students, where young little children are asked daily or multiple times a week, what gender are you today? What do you feel like today? Well, and people would say, oh, it's just a question. It's so innocuous. The power of a question cannot be underestimated. And the way that little tiny minds are being influenced by these so-called questions that are supposedly innocent, they are anything but innocent in the way that they start to cause children, if you're being asked the question by an adult, and not only an adult, but an authority as a teacher, and you're asked this often enough, it certainly is instilling in children's minds that it's not a fixed and stable thing. That it's something that, especially when you're being asked over and over again, how many times do you have to ask me? I'm a boy. But if you're asked multiple times, it does start to implant a question and doubt, which fits right in with the ideology and the framework of the intentional queering of the American child. And so I was reminded of those things as you just mentioned this question that was asked. And again, the power of it. Do you have any thoughts about whether it was that event or other events even where a question has had such power to kind of kick the door open to this whole other framework of thinking, and in many cases, a pretty dark framework of thinking?
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't really thought about any other questions, but that question, it was just, it really did kick the door open, as to quote your wife's words, because words are powerful, and we don't realize how much power we have in our tongue just to speak something or to ask a question. Yeah.
Proverbs says that the power of life and death are in the tongue, and of course, James in the book of James talks about the power of the tongue as well. So, anyway, I'd love for you to kind of you came back and just kind of, I think, told your mom flat out, here's the deal. Yes,
I did. Yeah, and she was not happy about it at all. But of course, there was nothing for her to do. I'd made this decision. And so, I started on the path to that. And Garry, it's crazy how quickly these things can come about.
Yes.
I mean, there's no 2 years of going through psychological evaluation and living as the other gender anymore. I went in 2018, and this can get you at any age, because I'm about to be 57 next month.
Okay.
So I was around 50 when this all started. So, I mean, as soon as I had said, "Oh, I'm trans," like I was in with a therapist within a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
On our second visit, she was ready to write me a letter. I'm the one who said, let's wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, I didn't wait long. The next session, I was like, okay, let's write the letter. So I admitted
and the letter, just be clear to our listeners and viewers, they probably know, but the letter was a letter saying what, basically?
Yeah, the letter was saying that I had gender dysphoria, and that I needed to transition.
Yep, you qualified for transition after just a second visit. I've even heard of that happening in the first visit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm not surprised at that. Yep. So in July, 2018, I had said out loud to myself that I was trans. In August, I think it was August or the beginning of September, I had my first session with this therapist. So by the end of August, I had the letter.
Yep.
So I changed my name, my gender. on my driver's license, my birth certificate, my social security card by the end of the year. January 2019, I'm getting a complete hysterectomy.
Wow.
The end of 2019, only because I didn't want to be under anesthesia so soon after that one surgery. I waited till the end of 2019 and I had complete, total double mastectomy with the resculpting. Was on testosterone before those things, like by the end of that previous year. That previous year. So like within a year and a half, I was on testosterone. I had my name and gender marker changed. I'd already had a complete hysterectomy, everything removed. I had my breast removed. And that's fast. That's way too.
Yes.
Fast for something that really shouldn't be happening at all.
Right.
And I look back and I'm like, wow, I was sacrificing my body. I look at it as I was literally sacrificing my body to the enemy, to my enemy, to God's enemy.
Yeah.
Instead of presenting it to God as a living sacrifice, but a whole living sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
which is Romans 12, 1 and 2, right? Talking
Yes.
about that, presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice. But just to fast forward for a flash for a moment, but you're presenting yourself as a living sacrifice today, right? And
Yes.
and you have been for some time, and it's all about, glory to God for that. But coming back to where you were, I've talked to other people, and we've done some other podcasts with detransitioners, and I'm thinking of a guy in particular that shared his story on here, and it just seemed like he was under this. He wasn't under a spell, but it was almost for a period of time like he was, definitely spiritual forces of darkness. He talks about that himself. And so in some sense, I guess, yes, but it was like his mind was completely clouded, and all he could see, very tunnel visioned, all he could see was this, because we're told that over and over and over again in the culture, that this is the panacea. This is anything short of this, and you're not going to be happy. You've got to kind of go after it all and own this. And what I remember, there's a woman on the internet now, not a believer, but talks about how for her, the goalpost kept moving. The goalpost kept moving from she'd socially transitioned, and that felt great for a while, and it was euphoric. And then all of a sudden, or over the course of time, she was started to feel that garbage again, that negative, those negative feelings, the gender dysphoria, and then she decided to go ahead and get on cross-sex hormones and testosterone, and then for a while that was great, and then again the goalpost moved, and so she had to get the double mastectomy, and the same thing, and then the goalpost moved, and then she's doing the bottom surgery, and she just talked about how that was a pretty common within trans circles, was a discussion that was pretty common about, again, these highs, and then there'd have to be something else. And she realized as an unbeliever, like she just realized this is never going to stop. This idea, I could keep trying to sort of quote unquote perfect this, but then she began to realize, wait a minute, what have I done? I am a woman. I need to re-embrace. I need to look at the underlying causes, which frankly to me is shocking and unconscionable, that people are going into counselors, trained, supposedly equipped counselors, and counselors frankly are scared to death to explore any possible factors that could feed into gender dysphoria, because their licenses are being threatened, and many of them have just kind of drank the Kool-Aid, and they're not. How sad is it that you have somebody sitting in front of you who has even mentioned, I've heard of these stories, they've even talked about the sexual abuse they went through, they've even talked about the rape that they experienced or whatever, and none of that is being addressed. It's just, well, you're trans, and so let's get you on this conveyor belt. And meanwhile, they take all of this garbage with them, all these unhealed wounds with them, into thinking that the more they drill down and the closer they get to looking like or presenting as a man or as a guy, as a woman or whatever, that they're going to feel these are going to be resolved, and yet they're not resolved. I think that's just such a criminal way of walking alongside of or trying to support people rather than helping them to the degree they're willing to, helping them understand how underlying factors and wounds of the past and trauma of the past can feed into a lot of these feelings that that cause gender dysphoria.
Yeah, I agree. I did these things, but nothing inside changed. I was still the same person. I still felt the same. And I eventually came to realize that this was just a mask to hide behind. But I want to get to the good part of my
yes, for sure.
story, the transformation part. So I was involved with a trans support group at that time as well. And so, as you know, COVID came around.
Yep.
And that was a hard time and really difficult for a lot of people. But for me, it was a blessing in disguise that I didn't realize. So many things were happening. So I was shut off from the trans group, the trans support group. I didn't go to get my testosterone anymore just because I just didn't want to go. And every time I went, the doctor who was prescribing the testosterone to me, every time she would ask me about bottom surgery. And for me, for some reason, that was somewhere I thought about it, but I'm a big researcher and I love to look into things. So I went and looked into all the methods and all the things that happen and what could go wrong and everything. And I'm like, this is just not worth taking the risk for that.
Right.
So I was
and never mind the fact that there are massive dollars for doctors and for the medical industry and the pharmaceutical companies for all of this. You're permanently medicalizing someone for the rest of their life. And so the reality of having to be on these medications, or just the initial cost or the initial money that these doctors and hospitals can make from just one bottom surgery for a woman, or even a double mastectomy or bottom surgery on a guy. I mean, the numbers are huge. And so it's tragic that I heard saw a video that was passed around at a medical symposium of somebody getting up in front of the doctors and just talking about how much money they can make. The whole thing was based on money. It wasn't based on the well-being of the individual. It was based on the money that doctors and hospitals, it was this insular thing talking to one another in this symposium that somebody recorded and got out. And it's just disgusting to me how money drives so many disgusting things, but it's disgusting how money is driving this, especially when it's focused so much on children as well as adults. Oh yeah. Yes, I totally agree. It's such a shame because the medical community started out from the Christian community. They're the one that started the medical community. Yep. To, I believe, make you a whole well person in your body and your spirit and your soul. And now it's become a greedy money-making machine. Well, and so much is the same thing with higher education, right? I mean, how many of these institutions, Ivy League institutions, were once solidly biblical and now are the antithesis of that? And so I just want to point those things out. But that doesn't eliminate or rob us of the hope that Christ came to give us, right? But we have to, as Christians or even non-Christians, I think we have to have our eyes open to the way that so much within education and the medical institution, although they were founded and grounded in so many phenomenal, wonderful Judeo-Christian values, are in many cases anything but that today. We need to have our eyes wide open while still understanding also that none of that stops Jesus from transforming lives. Yes, amen. Thank God for that. That's right. Because he's transformed me. So, So at the same time I was cut off from all of this, at my job, we were able to listen to music or books or whatever. And I had been listening to a lot of, and I know you've heard this part before, a lot of psychological thrillers. That was my genre to listen to. But things just kept getting darker and darker, incest, cannibalism, and then stuff would get darker in these books. And so I thought to myself, and I know this, look back, this was the Holy Spirit. This stuff is going to affect me negatively. I've got to quit listening to this.
getting darker and darker. So I know what I'll do. I'll listen to the Bible, because these kind of things are in the Bible, which it's about God, but it's also the history of a people.
Yes.
So I did not start listening to the Bible to change my life or to change my heart or mind on anything.
I love that. How God ambushes us sometimes, right?
Right. So every day at my job, if you condensed it down, it would probably be about a year and a half total, because I automatically changed the music I was listening to as well. I quit listening to secular music. I started listening to more worship and gospel music. And so I'd take a break from listening to the books, the Bible, for a while, and it'd be like, I just automatically changed my music. And every once in a while, the very first time it happened, I remember it's like the volume went up on my phone, in my ears, and I was like, what's going on? And nobody had touched it. I thought somebody had gotten my phone and turned the volume up. It realized it was the Holy Spirit highlighting scripture to me. And he would do that every once in a while, and I would just go look it up and a little bit more about it. But that wasn't often. It was just, even though I wasn't a lot of times halfway paying attention to the Bible because I was working, it started transforming my heart.
So good.
And God just revealed to me his love for me and how he loved me, and he did want me, and that he had a plan, and that his plan was right and good, and that he'd created me as a woman because that's what he saw fit to do. That was his purpose. And so my big thing is the word of God is so powerful, so transformative. And so I finally got to where I was just not happy on my job. And it was time to leave. And so I had started talking to my mother, because she lives here. And she's like, well, why don't you come down here? And it was just a God thing, not just to reconcile my relationship with my mom, which it was for that. But I believe for me to actually find the church I'm going to now and to come here, because so much good teaching, so many ways to cultivate an intimate relationship with God, so much teaching on that, and really walking alongside you to help you to do that. And it's been so good.
Yeah,
so
that's
good.
awesome. Yeah, Lisa, you're in one of those really good churches. I mean, there's no perfect church, that's for sure.
Right.
But you're in one of those churches that really takes seriously this idea of doing life together and loving one another in the mess and in the struggles. And so I love where you're planted. And it's just, it reminds me of the church that I got planted in eventually. But the truth is, it shouldn't be so difficult to find a church like this, but it is.
Yeah.
And lots of, quote unquote, good churches, good people. And I say good people. Yeah. I mean, apart from Christ, none of us are good. We're all wicked. We all seek our own way. But people that care about Jesus, people that care about their faith. And yet there's such a resistance to live out biblical community and to let others into our lives and to be willing to get into the lives of others, not for the sake of being a busybody, not for the sake of gossip, not for the sake of, morbid curiosity, but for the sake of love, for the sake of being in relationship with one another and seeing people's lives transformed and getting to be a part of that. I mean, it's just, there's nothing better than getting to be a part of the transforming work that God is doing in someone's life.
Yes. And when I first came here, I was still wearing the men's clothes, and I was
I want you to talk more about that. I love that. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had quit taking the testosterone, but, I still had a little bit of facial hair sometimes, and I would trim it down sometimes or cut it off. But I was still, God was doing something on the inside, but you couldn't tell it from the outside yet.
Yep.
I came here still using the name that I'd changed my name to, because I hadn't changed it back yet. I didn't even know if I was going to.
Yeah.
Wearing the men's clothes, just it took time for the outside to change. And I do remember the very first time when I was here, when I decided, okay, I believe I need to start dressing more like a woman. Let me buy women's clothes and get rid of the men's clothes.
When did that begin to, and I love what you said. God was at work on the inside, but you couldn't yet see it on the outside. So the evidence of God's work isn't like, oh, he showed up and started working, and the next thing you know, you're wearing women's clothing. It was, no, this much, much deeper inner work of the heart and of the soul that then began to make its way out to the outer shell, outer appearance. And so when did you kind of begin that shift from the time you started attending the church?
Yeah. So, oh my goodness, it wasn't, I don't even know if I had started New Covenant yet. Because I did go to another church here first that was my parents had been to, and it was down the corner. And actually it's more legalistic, like the very first church I was, grew up in, but I still wore my pants and still was looking like a guy. But I needed to find a different church, and I didn't know where the Lord was leading me. I actually came to visit here once at the beginning of that summer, and then I didn't come back till October. But in between there somewhere, I remember going to look for some women's clothes, Gary, and I had been dressing like a guy for so long, and I didn't even know my own style, and I'm not sure if I really do yet. I have a hodgepodge of whatever clothes. A lot of them have been given to me, but I was looking around trying to find something, and I started crying in the store. I'm like, I can't do this. I don't even know what to get. I don't know what to do. And really the real transition for me is actually becoming who God created me to be.
Yes.
Because I've had this mindset and this style for so long that I'm really, transitioning into who God made me to be. That's the real part. But so it was hard to let some of those things go. And God had to work on me to let some of those things go. I mean, honestly, I just got my name and gender marker changed last year.
Yep. Yeah, I don't want people to miss what you just said either, in that, like you said earlier, the outer transition kind of began for you in, I think you were 50 or so. And so not that many years ago, but the truth is, since you were 4, you really took up this offense at being a girl, saw it as a liability, and really wanted to be a boy, and you leaned into that a lot, even though you felt like for a long time, like, I'll never do this, I can't afford it. It doesn't mean that for decades you didn't long for it. And then finally, when opportunity arose, and it was later in life that you began to transition, I mean, you went all in. You had top and bottom surgery, and so now, here you are. So it's not like you've just been doing this for 6 years or something. I mean, in some practical sense, yes, but at a heart level, it's been for decades, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And God's been unraveling this now for the last, how many years has it been since you kind of, at some point, began to really embrace who God made you to be?
Yeah. It was
the woman God made you to be.
Yeah, it started probably in, like, oh my goodness, 2020 at COVID. I mean, that was the very beginnings of it, but really just, like right after I came here, that was a big shift.
Yep.
For me. Yeah.
It reminds me too a little bit of when Abigail Shrier wrote in Irreversible Damage. She gave some stories of of people who, not many of them, not even Christians, who, and she herself is not a Christian, but how a number of people who saw their child going in this downward spiral. And her book is primarily about girls dealing with rapid onset gender dysphoria, ones that had never really even it showed any signs of being interested in being a boy, and dysphoria about being a girl, that it was in their friends groups in their teenage years or coming into puberty where somebody in the group started developing a fascination, often through social media. And they all kind of piled on, and before long, it kind of went through the whole friend group as a social contagion. And the entire group became just fixated on this process of transitioning and believing they should be boys, etc. But she talked about how sometimes this isn't always true, but where parents would sometimes pick up, like they were so desperate to get their daughter out of the environment that she was in, they would pick up and move to the other side of the country, find a new job, sell their home, all for the sake of rescuing their daughter. And in many cases, that worked. In many cases, removing, of course, now they're alert, and where many parents were just kind of on autopilot, caught up in their careers, caught up in their own interests or whatever. But when they finally realized through a slap in their face, like their daughter is going by a different name at school, the school is transitioning them, etc. They're presenting as a boy in school. Like when that realization hits them, many of them reacted in such a way that they began to cut off the social media influences and all those influences, and even pick up and move their family to some other state, all in an attempt to break the chain of connection. And that doesn't always work there. And it, of course, I think it almost always requires more than that. But that can be a very important thing in like, especially getting away from social media and many of those influences, and from the friend group that is feeding these ideas. We've got to break that. And so often I just hear that great success happens around those things being broken, but then you're pursuing new things in Christ.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to, with all this, my friends are doing this and I'm getting this from my friends and stuff. Even though we here in the West are so about individualism and we're such individualists, deep down inside, we really are about community, because God's put that in us to be about community.
That's right.
And so this thing, it's a community contagion thing, and if you're not in the right community, or even getting that community at home from your family,
that's right,
instead of being disconnected, then that's going to affect us. And we call it, we're so much individualist, but then again, we're following the community or the crowd we're around.
Yes, that's right. Well, and my wife, as a licensed counselor, talks a lot about the idea, and I've read this in plenty of books too, but the concept of attachment theory in the counseling process, but understanding that attachment is meant to happen even pre-birth, but certainly after that. And it's so important that now we understand how important it is that babies aren't just whisked away to the NICU and stay there basically for as preemies or whatever, which my wife was. Both she and her twin sister were born very, very early. And put right into this kind of incubator situation, and had very little contact with mom or dad, or for a long period of time. I can't remember now how many weeks or months even. And now we understand the importance of immediate skin-on-skin connection with our mom or our dad for the baby, and also important for the adults too, to have that begin to form that attachment. But attachment that forms in our early childhood and through our primary stages of development as children. And of course, at different stages, we kind of need a little bit, some different things. It's mom. It's all about mom in the beginning. And then it begins to extend more to dad, especially for boys around the age of 1.5 years or 2 years old. And then it begins to extend more toward peers. And it's not that mom isn't important or dad isn't important. They are, but hopefully they've already become an established safe sense of security and attachment. And now we get to this God-given stage of development where we get to know who we are as boys or as girls in relationship with our own sex, with other boys for me, with other girls for you. Well, where that doesn't happen, or where either through rejection of our own sex or through us rejecting our own sex and preferring the other for a variety of reasons, things begin. We weren't meant for that, and healthy attachment doesn't happen. But it doesn't change the fact that we were made for healthy attachment. Just as you're saying, Lisa, I love it. We were made for community. And if we don't have authentic, rich attachment and community and deep emotional connection with brothers and sisters as sisters, then we're going to search for it somewhere. And oftentimes it is in pornography, or it's sexual sin, or it's in the refrigerator and pantry, or whatever the case. And so we need to really understand that we have all these legitimate needs that God gave us, but we've been meeting a variety of them, most of them maybe in illegitimate ways. And so part of discipleship is coming back to say, Lord, how do you want to really feed my soul as a man or a woman made in your image? And how can you in turn use me in the kingdom? I love that we're never too old. We're still growing. We're still becoming. God, I love this idea, the concept of leaning into the more that God has for us, regardless of our ages. But you're being poured into now, I know, Lisa, and also your story and your message and just your life in general, even apart from your story, is a blessing to so many around you.
Yeah, I just thank God that He didn't give up on me.
Yes.
And that He's got me in this community, because you're right. I'm being poured into in positive ways, and I'm learning to develop healthy relationships with other women, and the way God meant it to be. And, just to see myself in a more healthy, better way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
How would you describe, as we're kind of coming to the close of our podcast, how would you describe the way, your internal sense of well-being? How would you describe that? When I say today, I mean over the last, several years or whatever, at least. How would you describe that to the years prior, and in living as a man, living in, maybe not even as a man, but as a lesbian, pursuing relationship with other women? How would you describe those two different worlds, parts of your life?
Oh, wow. I mean, just so different. And the big key is now I'm accepting and receiving what God says about me.
Yes.
And what He says. And whereas before, I really felt like I had to hang on to someone, that there was this.
Yes.
Now I'm free to let that person, let them be who they are, and not be who I think they should be. Right.
Or find your identity in them even.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And one of the things I feel like, and I've only known you, Lisa, since you've surrendered your life to Jesus and recommitted your life to Him and began really pursuing Him, also in light of who He created you to be as a woman made in His image. But whenever I get a chance to interact with you, honestly, one of the clearest things I sense is peace, and not just, it's not just that, and it's not just that you have peace. And I don't mean that you don't have anxiety or turmoil. And I mean, we all do, but there's something that you embody that isn't just peace within you, but I feel peaceful when we're interacting, and it's really a beauty, and also beauty. I mean, there's something that exudes from you in your yieldedness and your yes to Jesus, your yes to the Father, that is just glorious, honestly, whenever I get a chance to interact with you. And that's just, what a wonderful God that He can produce that.
Yes, because that's Him in me, right?
Yes,
yeah.
right.
And who He designed me to be.
Yes.
And I just, goodness, I just want to walk in the fullness of everything that that he wants me to walk in, and not just for myself, but for others.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
there are so many out there that are just waiting for someone, to
That's right.
express who God really is and how he really loves and cares about them and wants them.
Yep, that's right. Well, hey,
Yeah.
last point here before I let you go. Our ministry is, and myself in particular, I'm not a fan, nor is my wife a fan of the perspective that's often referred to as celibate gay Christianity or side B Christianity, because I would love for you to kind of weigh in terms of, I know for me that if I were to still identify as a gay man, but yet I know I can't act on that would be sin, which is what this particular perspective teaches. You can't do that, but it's who you are. And so now you have to live in constant turmoil of your identity as a gay man or woman, lesbian woman, hyphenate that to your Christianity. You need to live as a Christian, which means you can't sleep with someone of the same sex. And by the way, you'll probably never have sex with anyone because you're gay. And so you can't really marry the opposite sex. If you do, we're going to call that a mixed orientation marriage. And that comes with all kinds of baggage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it just drives me crazy because, my wife and I have been married going on 18 years now. And of course we've had problems like everybody else in our marriage, but I wouldn't trade one day of my marriage for her for all the ups, the highs that I ever had back in the LGBT days when I was living in that and identifying that way. My point is this: I would love your thoughts on just the incongruence of trying to embrace an identity that if you were to act on would be sin, but still hunkering down in that identity, or like a trans Christian or a queer Christian or a lesbian Christian identity. That feels incredibly incongruent to me, but I'd love your perspective on that as well.
Yeah. I've heard you mention this a few times in a couple of your podcasts that I've listened to, and I'm in total agreement with you. There's not a gay Christian or a trans Christian. They don't mix. They don't go together. That you're still being held in bondage. If you, if you believe that, God has an identity that he calls you by, and none of those have any type of sexual label or innuendo or anything about them. It's, that's more of a behavior, but people want to take it on as their identity, and
That's
it's
right.
not. And I believe that is still, that's the enemy still holding you in bondage.
Yep. Well, and what we often say is that our sense of identity is even more foundational and maybe formational than what we do sexually. And so our identity really informs everything else about us. I don't even know if I've mentioned this in past podcasts. Maybe I have, but I'm going to just mention it again. I remember reading through the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I don't think James is a Christian. The book certainly isn't a particularly Christian book. It really is about helping anybody in regard to an atomic habits is not this idea of doing these big explosive things. It's the opposite. It's do these little tiny things, atomic, do these little small things that have the potential, when you stack them or add them together or whatever, that have the potential of making massive impact in your life through just making some simple changes. But one of the things he talks about in one of the chapters is how if you want to really grow and change who you are, and again, I haven't read it in a number of years, but the idea is if you really want to impact who you are and make changes, you first need to address your identity. And he's not talking about sexual identity. He's not talking about anything LGBT, none of that. He gives an example of someone who has been smoking for a long time. They know they need to quit. They quit. Two people, actually. They both quit. And somebody offers them a cigarette maybe a week or two after they've quit. And one person says, "Oh, no, thank you, I'm trying to quit." The other person says, "Oh, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker." Well, those are two entirely different perspectives of I'm trying to quit. I still identify as a smoker who's trying to quit, but the other one is like, no, I'm not a smoker. Well, they just quit a week or two ago, but they see themselves. Yeah. They know that their identity needs to shift in order for them to experience success. And so that's a simple comparison or what have you. But for those who continue to identify in their sexual brokenness or their attractions and identify by that, as opposed to saying, I still experience same-sex attraction, or I still deal with some gender dysphoria from time to time, or maybe even a lot to begin with, that's different than saying, this is who I am. And so it's really critical that we do, and you said this too, Lisa, that we do embrace this identity that Jesus calls us by, that the Father calls us into, and we embrace that is the totality of our identity, even while we're wrestling with the different desires and attractions and those kinds of things that we deal with in this world, this broken world, and out of our own history. Yes, but that's not our identity. So I just think it's so critical that people begin to see themselves by the power of God, and they see themselves differently. And also within community, we get to tell one another something different than the script we believed for years and years. That's one of the reasons we need to be doing life on life kind of community, so that we can hear others who see us and experience us very differently than the negative ways we've experienced ourselves, or the labels that have been stuck on us by kids or peers or parents or whoever. Those need to be broken away. And that's most done effectively within a healthy, not perfect, but a pretty healthy body of Christ. So final thoughts, Lisa, on anything that we've talked about that you've not been able to share yet that you want to leave with our listeners or viewers?
Oh, I know I want you to send me the link to that book because I want to read that. I'm big on identity now because, identity is important, and it goes back to the words that we speak. Like That's you right. said, this person who had quit smoking, the one said, "Well, I'm trying to quit," and the other said, "I don't smoke." So what we speak over ourselves needs to line up with what God speaks over us. I think that's big. Yeah.
Even while I'll also just add this again, I think one of the things the church has done a huge disservice on is we've not been honest about the things we actually are struggling with. But again, to struggle and fail and even live in patterns of sin or compulsion or whatever, obviously that's not good. That's not healthy. But even when we've not taken that on as an identity, we still need to learn as the church to not take on things that aren't true about us in terms of identity, embrace what's true, but also let's get real about the crap we do struggle with instead of this bull crap, veneer and whitewashing that we tend to do in the church to make ourselves look so good and all this image management. No, let's tell the truth about where we're at and what we're struggling with, especially with our band of brothers and band of sisters. Let's get real there in a way that we've not been in the past, because it doesn't do us any good to lie about and deceive how we're actually doing. We need to be real about that, but that's not our identity. So, hey, Lisa, it's been so good to get some time with you. I'm excited to get back down to Georgia in the fall with Melissa and spend some time with this church, with New Covenant, and also particularly I look forward to getting some time with you. So thank you so much for sharing with us and joining us for this episode.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me on. And I'm really excited about you and Melissa coming in the fall. I'm so excited to meet Melissa because I haven't gotten to meet her before. And just thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's really been an honor. Thank you.
Oh, we've loved it. And I know that our viewers, our listeners, thank you guys for joining in and listening to this podcast, taking it in. I hope that you've appreciated what Lisa has shared in terms of her own story and what God has brought her through. So again, bless you. We look forward to seeing you in a future episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Take care, everybody. We so appreciate the time you've just invested with us in our Transforming Congregations podcast. To join us for future podcasts, dial into transformingcongregations.org/podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.